The time may be running out for TikTok. The House overwhelmingly voting to pass a bill that could lead to a TikTok ban if its current Chinese owner doesn't sell the company. The concern is that the current ownership structure is a national security threat, with communist China scooping up millions of Americans' data. Bipartisan lawmakers pushing back on accusations that the bill infringes on free speech, saying it's not an outright ban.
Our intention is for TikTok to continue to operate, but not under the control of the Chinese Communist Party.
And in that world, TikTok users can continue to use the platform. In fact, I think it would allow for a better user experience.
But the main thing, though, is we want TikTok to exist. We're not there to ban it. I've said we want to make it tic-tac-toe.
The bill does not violate the First Amendment. It focuses on conduct, not content.
Lawmakers opposing the bill, they say the opposite, calling it a Trojan horse, endangering the First Amendment.
This legislation to ban TikTok is actually a Trojan horse. Some of us are concerned that there are First Amendment implications here. Americans have the right to view information.
Americans have access to real images of the horrors that are experienced by Palestinians daily. We no longer have to rely on legacy media to get that information.
I don't like bans on speech, and I want to find ways, to better, restrict the use of data without, taking away a platform.
But the squad probably has the most stunning take. Ayanna Pressley says a TikTok ban might cause violence and racism. She told Politico this: "I also think this is simply just fomenting anti-Asian and Chinese sentiment." So, Harold, apparently there was a lot behind the scenes that we don't know about. There were classified briefings with House members. And I just wanted to go to you first because as somebody who used to be a member of Congress, to get to this kind of a bipartisan result, there must have been something else that we don't even know about the threat that made them think we got to get on board.
It had to be. And having been a part, not of a briefing about China, but when I was in Congress, we were, the war between us and Afghanistan, really us and Islamic terrorism, was at its height in the early 2000s. I listened to a lot of people talk about this, and I think people who said we don't want to disadvantage people who make a living on TikTok. We don't want to disadvantage people who find communities of support on TikTok. I mean, I'm sure that being bribed by a foreign government is a good way to make a living, but that's not a defense in a treason trial. You can't say I'm making a good living here, so you shouldn't be able to do this. If your speech or if an exercise of a freedom disadvantages our national security or advantages an adversary of ours, you would expect and want Congress to act. To me, this is really a no-brainer. I hope that ByteDance will be able to convince the Chinese government, the Communist Party of China, to allow them to divest that company. They claim that all of the U.S. data that they have is housed in some facility in Texas, and that the Chinese government has no access to it. And we say, all right, we trust you, but let's verify. Sell the company to an American entity. Everybody keep their financial interests intact. And that way we ensure that our data, which has become the most lethal weapon in national security circles, almost as lethal in some ways, and don't take this the wrong way, but almost as lethal as nuclear weapons, because we don't use nuclear weapons daily. We use data and we manipulate data. Can you imagine in our economic challenges with China, as we look at an AI race, as we look at a race to see who can make the best robots, who can make the best batteries, that they have all of this information about 200 million Americans, how they would leverage that in negotiations with us on trade, space infrastructure, including the telecom infrastructure in space. When Mark Warner, the Democrat senator, Marco Rubio, the Republican senator, who are the chair and vice chair of the Intelligence Committee, what a way they do it. They don't say ranking member and chairman, but chair and vice chair. They both agree that they can tighten this House bill up, but you have to take this step against TikTok. As bad as it may be for some people who rely on TikTok for all of their entertainment, for their ability to make a living, for all of their friendships, there's something that trumps that. It's the national security of the United States.
And some people, I would add their news as well. Pew polled this last year, Jesse, and when people were informed that TikTok is owned by a company controlled by the CCP, 60% of people said, well, that's not a good idea. Let's figure out a way to make some common sense decisions here.
It's more about control. And so the Chinese have TikTok. We have Twitter and Facebook. The government doesn't really have Twitter like they used to. So they only really can control Facebook. They can't get into Musk's back door like they can with Zuckerberg. So you have this other app over here TikTok, and the federal government wants control of it. We want to have CIA guys working inside that company. We want to be able to have the FBI call TikTok and say, hey, you better shut this down. Okay. We want to be able to collect the data, use the data, exploit the data. That's understandable, okay? Because as a user in America, you can either be spied on and mentally destroyed by the Chinese, or you could have election interference by your own government here. And that's what this is about. This is about wresting control of this powerful app from the Chinese to the Americans. And do I trust my government more than the Chinese government? Of course. Do I think our government is going to use the access and the information from TikTok for great purposes, especially Democrats that have nasty ideas about election interference? I doubt that. But that's what's going on.
Okay, I hadn't thought of it that way, and I appreciate thinking about it that way. What do you think, Greg?
Well, I like, excuse me, I like the ban because there are two reasons why. It's really popular among people that I despise, i.e. influencers, which are worse than communists. And it's also a mass persuader. If you look at every bad idea that is plaguing America, racial division, gender hysteria, these stupid stunts kids do, it's direct. These things are directly injected into a generation of Americans with unformed brains. So we do need to sever the connection between TikTok and the communists. It's not about ownership, it's about control, right? It's like owning TikTok is meaningless if the Chinese are in charge, because there are people that own TikTok now that aren't Chinese. So Jesse mentioned it yesterday that TikTok picks up everything, and that includes keystrokes, right? From devices when it's not TikTok. It's almost as if you have to use it safely. You have to be in a separate room that's completely walled off, and you have to wear a hazmat suit. It really is like COVID. It's like social media COVID. But I don't think this ban is real, which is why everybody voted for it. It's like when everybody voted for William Hung for American Idol. Remember that? It's because it was just, nothing's going to happen. Because the ban, as far as I can tell, can apply to other platforms, so that's going to kill it. It has to be, the bill itself has to be walled off, so it applies only to certain platforms that are controlled by an adversary or by a communist country like China. It can't be, they can't all of a sudden decide that they want to use it on X or they want to use it on Facebook. I think that's the poison pill here. And then Harold said something about try to sell it to somebody. I think that's where this is the first step to getting it to sell somebody. Maybe it is this guy Yaz. Is that his name? Yaz?
Yeah. They're going to approve it to a group of investors who our government likes.
Well, you should do a show. Where is he now? William Hung.
Oh, yeah.
It'd be great to know.
I think he became a gambling addict.
Wow. Okay. Well, we can tell you in the next break.
No, I just read it.
Judge, I'm sure you've been following this too.
Yes,
You've got the actual bill in your hands.
Yeah, I have the bill in my hands, and it is specifically for ByteDance and TikTok. Okay, so it's not an across-the-board bill. Look, there are a lot of people who are ambivalent about this. I heard Jim Jordan this morning before he went in to vote. He said, I don't know how I'm going to vote on it. I heard Senator Kennedy say, I don't know how I'm going to vote on it. These hearings were not public. This is where I come down on this. Right now, 59% of young adults in this country would rather lose the right to vote than TikTok. 56% of adults in the United States use TikTok. 7 million small businesses advertise, and 170 million Americans are on TikTok. All right, that's a given. Young people in this country don't respect or believe that their right to privacy is what a lot of older Americans think it is. They're just not used to it. They grew up in the generation where everything was on social media. So, look, we don't want China controlling or influencing elections or controlling young people. But let me ask you this question. Who interfered with the 2020 election? Who suppressed free speech in the 2020 election? Facebook, when they wouldn't allow people to communicate and the press to communicate on Hunter Biden's laptop, all right? Which we have proven would have changed the election had these people, certain people, known about it. So you've got the United States now, and this is where I come down on the side of Jesse. The United States wants to be involved in everything. But what I think is going on here is that TikTok and everybody else is about the bottom line. And the bottom line is, if you're a Democrat, you're going to get a whole thread of stuff that are keyed into you. If you're a conservative, the stuff's going to be keyed into you. And so if right now X is already kind of middle ground or right wing, the only thing that's left is Facebook, and they've already interfered with the Constitution. Right now, in the United States Supreme Court is Missouri against Biden, where the United States Supreme Court is considering whether or not they can continue this injunction, making sure that the government doesn't tell social media what to do. That's what the government in the United States is doing. And my final point is this. Why worry about TikTok if Joe Biden and his family took money from a Chinese-connected company, CEFC?
Just for the record, they don't allow in China any U.S. social media platforms.
No, I know. And TikTok is different there. But also, if TikTok was really concerned just about the bottom line and not about our data, they stand to make a ton of money if they were to actually divest. If TikTok wants, if the bottom line is, if you're talking about money,
right,
they'd make a lot more money if they went ahead and took them up on it.
But, you know, they can buy this data. We talked about it yesterday. You drive your car. They sell our data to the insurance companies. This can all be purchased.
And that's why it's not actually about the money.
But they can't.
That's why they're fighting, because they want the data.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.